A man with calloused hands and a quiet manner sat by the riverbank where boats were pulled up for the night. He had been walking all day from a nearby village, and his clothes bore patches of earth and sky. Beside him lay an old fishing net, its knots loose but not broken. The sun dipped below the horizon as he watched a woman arrive, her steps slow and careful over the wet stones left by receding waves. She carried a basket filled with fresh loaves of bread, their crusts still warm from the oven. The man turned to face her when she neared, nodding in greeting without speaking. "Thought I'd stop here for a while," she said, her voice clear but soft. "It's quiet out here." "Yes," he replied, turning back towards the water. A breeze whispered through the reeds nearby. She set down the basket and pulled out one of the loaves. She tore off a piece and began to eat, savoring the taste with small bites. The man watched her for a moment before reaching into his own bag and taking out a bottle. He uncorked it, tilting back his head as he drank deep from its contents. "You know this spot well?" she asked between mouthfuls. He shrugged slightly, looking up at the stars that were now visible through gaps in the tree canopy. "Walked these paths many times," he said simply. She finished her bread and wiped her hands on a cloth tucked into her belt. She looked around them, at the darkness gathering between trees, before turning back to him with an offer. "Want some more?" He shook his head, offering instead a small smile that held no words of thanks but conveyed plenty without saying anything loud or grandiose. They sat together then in quiet companionship, his gaze following the slow flow of water moving past boulders and around bends, hers resting sometimes on him and often away, taking stock of what was beyond their immediate view. As dusk deepened into night, they began to pack up. She tied her basket tightly while he coiled his fishing net neatly. When done, there was a moment where neither spoke because perhaps there wasn't anything left that needed saying aloud. The man stood first and held out a hand towards the woman by way of farewell, offering something unspoken but understood, a nod toward each other's company for this brief interval. She took it, squeezing slightly before releasing. She turned to walk back downriver, her pace steady and unhurried. The man watched her go until she was swallowed by shadows beneath arching branches of trees. He stayed a bit longer after that, settling again onto the bank where he had started. He thought about what the evening might mean, but didn't try to capture it in words or lessons. Just as quietly as the sun set hours ago, now darkness fell over everything once more, and within its stillness lay all understanding and peace already spoken.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. A night bird called out across the silent trees, its echo fading into the misty riverbank as another day begins. In the early morning light of a temple courtyard, a young woman kneels beside an old woman, both watching the sunrise.
In the early morning light of a temple courtyard, a young woman kneels beside an old woman, both silently watching the sunrise. The old woman's hands are folded in her lap, knuckles worn and swollen from years of labor. The younger one's fingers rest lightly on the hilt of a wooden rake. A single persimmon tree stands at the edge of the courtyard, its branches bare but for a few lingering leaves. "Tea?" the old woman asks, turning to face her without looking away from the sun. She gestures toward the small ceramic pot simmering over the coals. The younger woman nods, shifting closer and taking the offered cup when it is passed between them. They drink in silence, savoring the warmth that seeps into their bones. "Your hands," the old woman says eventually, her voice soft yet clear as she studies the girl's hands. "They've done a lot of work too." The younger one smiles slightly and sets her cup down beside the pot, reaching out to pick up the rake from where it rests on the ground. She begins to sweep the leaves away in quiet circles. "Is there something you want to talk about?" The old woman's voice drifts over like a whisper carried by the wind. The girl hesitates for a moment before meeting the elder's gaze, her eyes reflecting the play of light and shadow across the courtyard. "I'm not sure," she says finally, her fingers lingering on the handle of the rake as if deciding to hold on or let go. Maybe it's about choices. She lets out a soft sigh, looking down at her hands once more. Choices come with their own kind of weight, the old woman replies calmly, her eyes never leaving the girl's face. The younger one nods again, this time with more understanding in her expression. I guess I've been thinking about what truly matters. They sit there for a while longer, the courtyard calm and serene around them. The old woman reaches out slowly to pat the ground beside her, inviting the young woman closer yet. When the girl sits down next to her without another word, they are close enough that their knees almost touch. The sun is high now, casting long shadows in its wake. Birds begin to sing, and a light breeze rustles through the leaves of the persimmon tree. I think, the old woman murmurs thoughtfully after some time has passed, that it's okay not to know everything. She holds out her hand, palm upturned toward the girl. In her fingers rests a small, unripe persimmon plucked from one of the branches earlier that morning. She offers it wordlessly. The young woman takes it carefully, turning it over in her hands and looking at its rough, green surface as if seeing something new there. The old woman smiles gently and then leans back against the courtyard wall, closing her eyes momentarily against the brightness. In response, the girl does not say anything. She stands quietly, lifting one hand to brush a stray strand of hair away from her face. She then sets the persimmon down beside the pot of tea and begins arranging leaves around it in an almost meditative pattern. The sound of birdsong fills the air as they sit together in this shared moment of quiet contemplation.
A single leaf drifted down toward the ground in the quiet temple yard, settling softly onto earth and stone. The last light of day slipped away behind distant mountains into a late autumn orchard where leaves lay scattered like whispers on the ground.
In the late autumn orchard, the leaves lay scattered like whispers on the ground. They crunched softly underfoot as she moved through them, leaving faint indentations that soon filled with the cool air of the coming night. She held a small basket in one hand, its contents concealed by a loose lid. A man stood near an old apple tree, his back to her, hands resting on the trunk. The sun was low, casting long shadows and gilding his hair with gold. She approached him quietly, placing the basket at his feet before she spoke. "Thought you might be hungry," she said simply. "I made these earlier." He turned slowly, looking down at the basket. His eyes softened when he saw what lay inside. A few crusty rolls and some thin slices of cheese wrapped in leaves for freshness. "I appreciate it," he replied, his voice warm but distant, as if remembering something far away. She nodded, watching him lift one of the rolls to his lips. The bread was dry but had an earthy flavor that lingered on his tongue. He broke off a piece and handed her half. "You always bring too much," he said with a small smile, setting down his portion beside hers. "There's enough here for both." She took the proffered food without comment, tucking it into her own basket before looking up at him again. Her eyes were clear and steady, unflinching in their regard. "Did you find what you came for?" she asked after a moment of shared silence. The leaves continued to whisper around them, as if answering some question neither had asked aloud. He nodded slowly, running his fingers over the rough bark beneath them both. "Yes," he said quietly, "just needed to see it again." The air between them felt thick with unsaid things, yet not heavy or uncomfortable. They stood there for a while longer, eating their simple meal side by side, each in their own thoughts and memories. When they finished, she closed the basket lid carefully and straightened up, her eyes flicking back to where he had been staring. The last apple from the tree hung barely on its stem, turning brown at the edges, but still holding onto life stubbornly. She looked at him again before speaking softly. "Do you think it's better this way?" His gaze followed hers as if only now seeing what she meant. He reached out tentatively, touching the browning fruit with a gentle finger. "It won't last much longer," he murmured, more to himself than her. Then, turning slightly towards her, he said simply, but maybe that's okay. She nodded again, understanding in both their eyes, and started moving back through the orchard as if letting something go. He watched her leave for a long moment before returning his attention to the apple tree once more. As night began to settle around them fully, she paused by an old wooden bench beside the path out of the orchard. She placed the basket down lightly on one end and sat down herself, gazing back at where he remained standing among the trees. He did not wave or call out, merely stood as still as if rooted there. The only sound now was the wind stirring through the nearly bare branches overhead. Her eyes narrowed slightly against a sudden chill in the air. Then she straightened up and continued walking home down the dirt road that led away from the orchard. At her house, she hung her coat on a hook inside the door and set the basket gently by the table before settling herself into another chair to wait out the rest of the evening. The last rays of sunlight faded through the windows as if sighing softly with relief. In the silent night that followed, he walked back from the orchard alone, but not feeling lonely at all. He stepped carefully over fallen leaves and thin shadows until finally reaching home himself. There was no need to hurry. Time stretched comfortably around him now like a well-worn cloak.
The last light of day slipped away behind the mountains, leaving only stars to watch over the silent orchard as night fell. After a heavy rain in the hillside village, Lena tended her garden early in the morning, pulling weeds between rows of green vegetables while the sky cleared.
In the hillside village after a night of heavy rain, the morning was soft and silent. A widow named Lena tended to her small garden, pulling weeds between rows of green vegetables. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if each plant had something precious to tell her. Nearby stood an old wooden bridge over a small stream that ran swiftly from the hills above. Early in the day, children would skip stones across it, but now only Lena's path led there. As she bent to pick a wilting lettuce leaf, Lena noticed drops of water clinging to spiderwebs. She paused for a moment, watching them slide together into fat globules before rolling off like tears from an eyelash. The morning light caught the droplets and made them sparkle briefly. By the time she reached the bridge, her basket was heavy with harvest. Her shoes were damp from crossing the wet grass, but she stepped onto the planks of the bridge without hesitation. Below, the stream gurgled around stones that glinted like coins in the water. Lena heard a cough before seeing anyone. It echoed slightly off the hillsides and through the early morning air. A man stood at the far end of the bridge, wiping his nose with a handkerchief. He was older than Lena, but not old enough to be called elderly. His clothing looked worn and patched, as if he traveled often. She paused halfway across the bridge, holding her basket by one handle, looking down into the stream where little swirls were forming around floating sticks and leaves. The man walked toward her slowly, his eyes fixed on her feet when he came close enough to pass without speaking. Lena could see a shadow of loneliness in his posture as he continued past her. Feeling oddly compelled, she turned and followed him off the bridge, back onto solid ground near where he'd been standing. He was now stooped over, picking something up from the grass. It was a stone with strange markings on it, like writing but simpler symbols. When Lena stepped closer to look at the engraving, the man straightened quickly and brushed dirt off his trousers. "It's nothing," he muttered almost to himself. "An old trinket." But Lena saw something in the lines of the rock, a story told in its crevices by years of water and wind. She offered him her handkerchief from her sleeve, which was clean but folded neatly with no sign of use. He looked at her hand, offering it to him, then met her eyes before accepting it carefully and wiping his nose again. "Thank you," he said softly, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell between them. Lena watched him pocket the rock in a battered jacket pocket after tucking the handkerchief inside as well. She turned back toward her garden, feeling lighter somehow despite carrying her heavy basket. The path back seemed shorter than it had when she came out to tend her vegetables. As Lena reached her gate and pushed it open with her hip, A sparrow flew up from under some bushes and chirped loudly before fluttering away into the sky.
A single leaf drifted down from a nearby tree and landed gently on the path ahead in the soft light of dawn. In the quiet alley between two clay walls, under the dim glow of an oil lamp, old Mr. Lee sat hunched over a small wooden table.
In the quiet alley between two clay walls, under the dim glow of an oil lamp, old Mr. Lee sat hunched over a small wooden table. He held in his hand a single dried lotus root, carefully counting each ring with a calloused thumb. His eyes were sharp but weary, scanning the rings as if seeking answers long ago etched into the plant's flesh. Beside him stood young May, her shoulders curled inward against the chill of night that seeped through the alley walls. Her breath misted in the air before her, and she held a wooden box, slightly worn from use but still sturdy. The box contained her grandmother's herbs, which had kept her family healthy for years. "You should go home," Mr. Lee said without looking up. "It's late." May shook her head silently, stepping closer to place the box on the table beside him. She watched as his fingers traced over a particularly intricate ring in the root before pausing to consider it further. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly after a moment of silence. Mr. Lee let out a sigh and set down the lotus root gently. "This is just an old man's work now," he admitted, glancing up at May with a tired smile. "There aren't many like me left who remember these things." May reached into her box and pulled out a small bag of dried mint leaves. She poured them onto the table next to him without a word. The leaves scattered in neat piles under the dim light, their edges crisp from drying. "Here," she said softly, "for your cough." Mr. Lee's eyes widened slightly at the offering. He reached for one of the leaves and crumbled it between his fingers, inhaling its sharp scent deeply before looking back up to meet May's gaze. "I don't know how long I can keep this place going," he confessed, nodding towards the narrow shop behind them that was slowly falling into disrepair. "The city isn't kind to old things." May nodded quietly but firmly. She picked up her grandmother's wooden mortar and pestle from inside the box and set it beside him. "Maybe I can help," she offered simply. Mr. Lee's lips curved upward at the corners, a small spark of warmth lighting his eyes as he watched her arrange the tools with practiced ease. "You know more than you think," he said quietly. His voice carried no accusation or pride, just an acknowledgement that sometimes even those who seem lost can find their path. As night deepened outside, Mr. Lee worked through the leaves and roots in silence. May watched him at first, but soon turned back to her own work, tending to her grandmother's medicines with the same care and reverence he showed his lotus root. Each motion was deliberate, a dance of precision and patience that spoke volumes about the quiet strength within both of them. When Mr. Lee finished his work for the night, he packed away the last remaining lotus root tenderly before turning to May one final time. He took her hand in his own rough but steady grip and squeezed it gently, a simple gesture that held more than words ever could. With a nod, he let go and watched as she gathered her things, preparing to leave for home under the watchful eyes of stars above. As she slipped past him into the darkened alley, Mr. Lee stood at his doorway watching until she was out of sight. Then he turned back inside, closing the shop door quietly behind him. The oil lamp flickered once more before settling into a steady flame, casting long shadows across the wooden floorboards where once only silence reigned.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again as the night deepened around it, holding each story's end close to the heart of quiet reflection. The Empty Teahouse rests. Until tomorrow.